The Apple Watch Series 10 is here. It has the biggest display ever. It's also the thinnest Apple Watch ever, making it even more comfortable on your wrist, whether you're running, swimming, or sleeping. And it's the fastest charging Apple Watch, getting you 8 hours of charge in just 15 minutes. The Apple Watch Series 10, available for the first time in glossy jet black aluminum. Compared to previous generations, iPhone XS or later required. Charge time and actual results will vary.
Auto insurance can all seem the same until it comes time to use it. So don't get stuck paying more for less coverage. Switch to USAA Auto Insurance and you could start saving money in no time. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
USAA. Now Taxes is 100% free when you file in the TurboTax app if you didn't file with us last year.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, just do your own taxes in the app by 2/18.
What if I have lots of forms?
All good, all 100% free.
What if I had 3 jobs?
Still 100% free.
What if I once saw Bigfoot?
That has nothing to do with taxes, so still 100% free.
Now that's what I'm talking about.
Now this is Taxes. See if you qualify in the TurboTax app. Excludes TurboTax Live, must start and file in app by 2/18.
Hello and welcome to And It's Live, your new retro football network. I am Martyn Ramsey, your host. The following show, the main event, A History of the Champions League, was first recorded on the Heart and Hand Patreon network, so some references to other shows on that platform may not be relevant to you. Myself, Adam Thornton and David Edgar are all Rangers fans and often make the point during these shows that the Rangers' experience in the Champions League, often not a happy one, is covered elsewhere on that platform in great detail. Despite our own fan leanings, these shows are a wider view of one of the most transformative innovations in the history of the game. We look back as football fans first, as history geeks second, and with great love and interest in the subject. We hope that comes through the shows and that you in turn share that enthusiasm. Good morning and welcome to this week's episode of The Main Event, our deep dive history of the Champions League and how it has shaped modern football. I'm Martyn, as always, and I'm joined by Adam. How are we tonight, Adamski?
I'm good, thank you. I'm prepared to enunciate after my 38 comments last week. Some podders get a hassle for not pronouncing their T's, but I pronounced too many of mine, I think, so... yeah, we'll keep going.
Blue dress, gold dress, all over again with Ronald de Boer's age. But just to be clear, Adam did not believe that a 41-year-old Ronald de Boer was tearing it up in Scotland. And David's here as well. How are we, David?
I'm good, thank you. Yes, always enunciate. Brown cow, all that stuff. Do your elocution before you get on air. But no, this is I feel a really seminal year in Champions League history, and I was explaining to you guys why I was so excited to do this one, because I actually think this Ajax team, I know we waxed lyrical about the one last year, and understandably so, I think this is better and more a year more experience, more confident within itself, and some of the football they played was just utterly spellbinding. And I used to, sad wee geek that I was, I remembered going back and what I had these on videotape for years. In fact, knowing my parents, it's probably still in the loft somewhere. Marked on a VHS, yes.
It is 1995-96, that's where we are in our odyssey, and it is an important year in European football on the pitch, but certainly off it, as events over the course of this season would show. We'll split, as we always do, these shows into two, and we'll save, I think, the big blockbuster stuff for next week. We'll talk a wee bit about that Ajax team on this week's show, but we have two new faces into the Champions League as it is, but we will keep those for next week, two big names. The first episode, gents, is a lot more surreal, a lot weirder. The Champions League draw took place, as it does, after the qualifying round. 4 groups still. And it's fair to say lopsided I think that would be a good way to describe this particular Champions League draw, with that Ajax team alongside Real Madrid and Juventus alongside Borussia Dortmund, whom, of course, we would know very well, which left two other groups, A and B, quite lacking perhaps in big name credentials, but not in stories. Let's start with the first group, Group A, which had Panathinaikos, Nantes, FC Porto, and Dynamo Kiev. Dynamo Kiev beat Panathinaikos in Kiev in match day 1, but it soon became apparent that they had attempted to bribe the Spanish referee that night, Lopez Nieto. They offered him $30,000 plus 2 fur coats, which I thought was an interesting little add-on. He refused, but the game went ahead anyway because I think it was quite close to kickoff, 100,000 in the stadium. Didn't really want to send them home, but he reported it very quickly soon after. And UEFA were swift. Dynamo Kiev were removed from the tournament. They were banned for 3 years. They would not serve that ban. It would actually be rescinded by the end of the season. And this is within a week. This is the 13th of September 95, this game. Their place is taken by the next Danish team available, which was Aalborg. They come in to play Porto, 2 weeks later? Just as if nothing had happened, as if they'd been preparing for all this. And an all-ball team, David, spearheaded by a player who would be at Ibrox later on that season. He would score in this Champions League group stage, one Erik Bo Anderson, of course. David, I just wanted to touch on this break. First of all, I had completely forgotten about this until looking back at the show. Sporting corruption, there are obviously famous stories. This clearly hasn't resonated with me. But when sporting cheatery does occur, we usually get the context, and you've got to understand the culture. Now, Dynamo Kiev, back in their heyday under Lebanovsky, the mathematician, as he was called, due to his very kind of scientific approach to football, and to, let's say, arranging other results. The Soviet League, David, quite a fair bit of distance sometimes has to be travelled, not quite going to Dingwall or Pataudry. There's some mammoth journeys to be taken, and away games were seen as a real struggle. 2 points for a win. Lobanovsky had his theorem that you win all your home games, and if you draw all your away games, you win the title. And so there was a lot of arranged draws. Not clear ever if there was money involved, by the way. It just sometimes suited both sides. Dynamo would therefore rest players and have a full squad fit and raring to go for their home games. Other teams understood what was happening and also did it, and it became so rife that the Soviet authorities had to limit the amount of draws that you were allowed to 8 or 10 or something like that. And if you drew after that, well, it's a defeat. Just the most remarkable and ridiculous kind of situation for a league championship to be in. So there was a culture, David, but we started this whole odyssey with Marseille, of course. It isn't out of football yet.
No, it isn't. And it was rife in football for many, many years. There's so many famous British stories about it, aren't there? The Forest, I think. Derby, in fact, when Clough was there with Juventus. Dundee United against AS Roma. 2-0 up, and believe it or not, folks, this is going to blow the mind of younger listeners. Dundee United were 2-0 up in the European Cup semi-final against Roma. And lost 3-0 away with some very dodgy officiating. So it was rife. It is, as you say, a cultural thing. In Italy, for example, they just don't understand why you wouldn't do it. Yeah, they don't get it. If you need a point and they need a point, say one team's avoiding relegation and you're going for the title, why wouldn't you just both get the point? They just don't understand it. But in the former Soviet Union, obviously, Dynamo Kiev are Ukrainian. I remember travelling to Russia 2007 for a holiday, and my compatriot who was Russian, one of my travelling party, she told us always have money on you for bribes because it is expected. It's just part of the culture. Always carry money. A policeman will come up and basically shake you down, not for a lot of money, but just have it anyway. So they, football is moving on, but to Kiev, this is probably something that has been done in the past. It's just an insurance policy. You make sure the referee gives you some favourable decision. It's blatant cheating, and of course they'd beaten Aalborg 4-1 on aggregate, 2 wins, 1-0 and 3-1 in the round, and Aalborg were just parachuted straight in, which was probably it almost looks a wee bit strange, but it's actually a fairly sensible decision. Do you want to be in? And of course, you're hardly going to say no. And we've seen Celtic benefit from this rule.
Yeah.
Oh Christ, it feels like about 20 times. So I actually do commend UEFA for acting quite quickly on this and coming up with what I think is probably a fair solution. But it's something I think that becomes more difficult in those days that we've referred to. The games possibly weren't even on television, so there wouldn't be this hue and cry about it that there is now, because of course everything is televised, and if a referee puts in a performance like that, it's going to be noted, unless they're Scottish, in which case they'll just assume, oh well, who's probably trying his best, it's just his level of ability. But I remember at the time reading this and being a little bit, what, they just come in and they were told, you come in with a loss, is that okay? Otherwise you don't come in. And they were, well, yeah, I'd rather come in, with this. And they didn't trouble the scorers anyway. Aalborg, they were well out of their depth, but they knew that the opportunity, firstly, for the players to play in it, and secondly, the finances that it would generate, they took it. But yeah, I remember thinking at the time, wow, imagine getting the opportunity to come in, but this result that you didn't get is going on your record. And I would actually say UEFA did what they could in the circumstances, but certainly I think this is indicative of practices that were possibly more widespread, and maybe not so much, in fact, definitely not so much in Britain, the old Corinthian spirit. We just don't go for it at all. We'd rather, win, lose, or draw fairly, because it sort of cheapens your achievement if you do it. But it's that old European, this is what we did. The fur coats is perfect for that, isn't it? I mean, that is the kind of thing you would watch, or you would see, or a watch, or a Mercedes. These were the sort of gifts. But it seems very 70s. It seems very early 80s. Here we are, mid 90s now, and it seems like an anachronism, and it's because it is.
Yeah, we Eric Bow, 3 goals in 4 or 5 games for Aalborg in the group stage of the Champions League.
If you used them correctly. He was pacey. Yeah, he was quick, and he could finish if you used them correctly, and we rarely did. We never did. We rarely did. But he was a good footballer. He was a cultured, capable footballer. And these days, somebody that's, as you say, got 3 goals in 4 Champions League matches is going to go for a bit of a premium.
Yeah. More than Ali got in the group stages, it should be noted. The winners then were Panathinaikos, this group, with Panathinaikos and Nantes. We'll touch on Nantes next week, Adam, and we'll save a chat about the Panathinaikos semi-final, because they get to the semi-finals this season, incredibly. We'll save that for the back end of this show. But they won the group quite handily. They won the quarter-final against Legia Warsaw quite handily. I'm trying not to diminish the fact that how on earth did they get to semi-final? They were in a European Cup final within 20 years of this particular moment, which is more than we can talk about. But quite a surprise at the time, and certainly a surprise looking back to see them trouble in the kind of last 4 of the Champions League. How did they do
it? So I think they had a striker who I must admit I had never heard of. When I look back on this, maybe similar to Winton Roofer that we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, Christoph Rijkaard, who I had not heard of. I'm sure you guys will have, but he joined Panathinaikos in 1989. He won 5 championships with them. This was very much their heyday. I think they won 4 out of the 6 before this.
Mm.
A very, very solid team, and he was the high scorer in Greece 3 times. He's also Panathinaikos' leading goal scorer, which is a bit strange. I think for a Polish player who goes to Greece, that's not a well-travelled route. I actually think they had another Polish player at this time whose name escapes me. And he's considered
that's
to be
part of the post 1990 Iron Curtain breaking down exodus. There was a flood on the market, so guys were beginning to, like, Poles and Romanians and Bulgarians and were popping up in weird places because there was just so many of them, all of a sudden desperate to leave.
It's a strange one, yeah. That makes sense because it's not a route that we see much of now, either. But yeah, I think goals was the big thing. They were really well organised. I think you don't associate that too much with Greek football. I don't think, outside of the obvious, which I'm sure we'll come on to from their win in 2004. But maybe this was a little bit of a precursor to that. But Rijkaard was their leading goal scorer, all time leading goal scorer, and an idol, and probably one of the best players to play in Greece, or certainly one of the best foreign players to play in Greece. So again, it's really good looking back at these teams that are unfancied, if you like, and looking into why they're doing as well as they are, and finding the reasons. And like we said before, this is something that dies out probably from now, really, I think, or certainly the next couple of years. Just small teams that you've never heard about that have these amazing players that you're like, how are you playing there? So yeah, I think they obviously go very, very far. Rijkaard scores a great goal, or one of the most important goals of his career, I think, in the semi, which we'll come on to. But yeah, I think it was just all about a really, really strong Panathinaikos team, the sort of first half of the decade. And as we've said a few times now on these shows, this sort of was their high point, and they probably don't ever get back to this.
David, we will come to the semi at the end of this episode, but were they a kind of prototype of what we would see with Otto Rehhagel in Portugal, 9 years later, whenever it was, 8-9 years later, at Euro 2004? Or did they have a wee bit more about them, or what was, because you were the geek watching all of this at the time?
Tragically, yes. Yeah, they were. Proto 2004 is an excellent way to describe them. I want to give them a wee bit of praise, actually, and that was not what young geek David would have said about them, because they were like watching paint dry up until they got the ball to Rijkaard, who was terrific, absolutely lightning quick, terrific finisher, composed finisher, and one of these guys who understands I might not get 8 or 9 chances this month, I might get 4. And I've got to take 2 of them. You know, that understanding, not only are they there to score goals, but that they have to have a very good ratio as well. But they were, I think, a bit ahead of their time in terms of their use of space. And I mean that in a defensive sense. They were terrifically well organised. They were really, really compact. They moved in tandem. They all knew their jobs. They all knew who should be where at any given time. And they were able to work so hard without the ball that they were a real frustration for sides to play against, Martin. And they tear through this group in terms of points. I mean, they are they top the group, but they're the best side in it. And the reason for this is that they were incredibly difficult to play against in a different way to what we were used to. When a side was defensive back then, it meant 5-4-1. It meant 2 banks of 5s on the edge of the box, kind of what we sort of see in Scotland as Rangers supporters. But that wasn't their game. They would move, but they would move together in packs. They would deny space to the opposition. So teams who had skillful players who they were getting doubled up on constantly. So they would turn the ball inside, and then suddenly they were getting doubled up. The person who got the ball was being doubled up on. We expect this now in football. This is top level stuff. This is a basic now. What do you do when you don't have the ball? But that was not the case back then. And they would come up against more fancied side who still had attackers who, the ball's not up here. I have no job currently. I need to just stand here on the halfway line and wait until we get the ball back, and then I will spring into life. And because of that, because Panathinaikos were utilising their players through the 10 outfield players right throughout the game, that made them very difficult to beat. Now, they would not have been able to get as far as they had got had they not had the striker there to put the chances away and to polish them off. We'll talk about the semi later on, which is two terrific performances, and probably not in the legs that listeners might have thought. Two terrific performances in the away leg from each side. But what they did really, really well, and I do think that they deserve a wee bit of credit for this, is that they sort of looked at how can we combat these sides who do have much better players than we have. And the way that they did that was, we will work harder, we will deny space, and we will make sure that even when we don't have the ball, we are constantly in the move and denying them space. And teams hated it, and it wasn't great to watch, but it really could nullify the opposition and frustrate them, which was another thing. The semi-final is a good example of that. The first leg, oppositions got really, really frustrated and tended to lose their discipline towards the end of the game.
Flex your business with an American Express Business Gold Card. You'll earn 4 times membership rewards points on your top 2 eligible spending categories, like transit and electronics, each month, on up to $150K in combined purchases per year. Plus, you can now earn 3 times membership rewards points on flights and prepaid hotels booked on AmexTravel.com. Terms and points cap apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-gold. Amex Business Gold, built for business by American Express.
Not to make this about Rangers necessarily, because there's hundreds of shows about that, but this is why, Adam, Rangers fans at the time were so frustrated with our abject showing. Said, wait a minute, that's not a bigger club than Rangers. They've not spent anywhere near the money we've spent. They don't have the high-profile players that we've got, and yet they can be organised, they can be well-suited to this, and we're just a mess. What does that say about, again, this dichotomy that we seem to have, or this duality in Scotland between super organised doesn't really transfer to Scottish football, because you need to be a lot more expansive to just beat already organised teams and then all of a sudden change on a Wednesday night. But also says a bit about the draw. I mean, it's not an easy group. I mean, you've got the Champions of France that they've kind of come through, but they certainly didn't have the draw that we had that particular year. Is it just a bit of both? I mean, what is that saying about our failings at that time when you've got clubs like that excelling?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's teams that are greater than the sum of their parts, and in certain situations, and teams that aren't. I think as far as Rangers are concerned, maybe there's an element of us taking our domestic mentality onto the European stage and sort of underestimating it and thinking it'll be fine. We'll be fine. We've got these great players later on. It's okay. We've got well, not later on. At this point, it's fine. We've got Gascoigne and Laudrup. Let's see what we can do, without sort of realising that, hang on, other teams have got these type of players as well, but they're also pretty well organised and they can tactically they're quite aware. So I think it's just that level up we probably underestimated just from being in British football or in Scottish football, I think. So yeah, I think it's about expectation. I think it's about fans, it's about size of the club, and then how you're supposed to approach these type of games. I think it is a bit of everything. It's probably worth there's a couple of little scene setters here. I was watching the highlights of some games and looking at the results in preparation for this, and the thing that struck me was the amount of goals everywhere. And I was like, there's like 4-1 for Blackburn and 4-0 for Rangers. A lot of bad results for Rangers, but this was the first year. Obviously, it was 3 points for a win as well. So I think it was supposed to encourage attacking play and make it so that you were more likely to go and get that goal to get the 3 points than sort of hang back and be a bit more cagey. And I think if this season is anything to go by, then it absolutely was a success there, because the amount of goals throughout the group stages in particular were ridiculous. So many everywhere. And then obviously this year, again, we speak so much about where I speak so much about 1992 and the pass back rule and all this sort of stuff, but this is a bit of a rival for it. When you think 3 points for a win, you've then got the 3-4 rule getting scrapped halfway through as well. You've got Bosman, which we'll come on to, which has major ramifications and was seen as a broadly positive thing. Probably still is overall, but then you think about some of these teams we're talking about that just get ripped apart and picked apart for their best players after a season or two now. So yeah, and I think this was the this was the last season, the old format as well, wasn't it? They expanded it from
a wee bit,
Okay,
it's just
season after.
I'm not sure there is a one moment. I know you're absolutely right to highlight the back pass in terms of how the game looks, how it's played, and how teams kind of set up. It's just part of the 90s story, really, from that nadir of Hillsborough to what Italia 90 brought, the possibilities and all this. We just done a draft on the World Cup in the USA 94. I think we touched on it in a recent main event as well, because that was 3 points for a win at a tournament for the first time. And what a difference that made to just how brave and colourful and exciting the football would be. So, yeah, well done to Panathinaikos. We will come back to them later on. You mentioned Blackburn there, Adam, who were in the second group with Spartak Moscow, Rosenborg and Legia Warsaw. Now, again, for Rangers fans listening to their draw, or our draw, Juventus, Borussia Dortmund, Steaua Bucharest, that is horrendous. And then Blackburn they've got it easy. Now, to try and press you this Blackburn story then, you've Jack Walker, a steel magnate, even bigger than our own chairman at the time, the biggest in Britain. His company's the biggest in Britain. He sells it, or biggest private company in Britain. He sells it to British Steel, I think around 1990, for £360 million, which is massive for the time, of course. And he has a huge love for flying. I think he tried to build his own airline. I think he lived in Jersey and he wanted to be a bit more ease of transport that way, but also Blackburn Rovers, which is, of course, is a huge love, who were in the second tier of English football at the time, and he sinks a fair bit of money to ensure they just make the playoffs and go through the playoffs to take their place in the very first Premier League in 92-1993. And he coaxes Kenny Dalglish out of that kind of very short retirement in order to make that happen. And, of course, they eventually win this title in 94-95 and take their places as the English representation. Almost immediately, it goes wrong. Kenny Dalglish, 10 days after that title win, decides to take the move upstairs, as it was called then, to become a director of football. Not a lot known about director of football at the time, it would appear, given a lot of the shows we've done on this network. Still, not a lot is known about what a director of football does. But I think it was generally expected that Kenny would take a step back. He's been under a lot of stress. The kind of post-Hillsborough thing, I don't think, really kind of hit fully yet, but he would scout opposition, he would scout players. Some of the opposition he was going to scout were their Champions League opponents. I don't know how much it got more than they come from Poland, they come from Russia, and they come from Norway. I don't think it was particularly extensive. They start terribly. Ray Hartford, how many times has Ray Hartford stepped up into that managerial role? Davey, you kind of tended to do it all the time. Ray Hartford was a brilliant number two, a brilliant light man, but he had no discipline at all. They were a riot. One of the Newcastle coaches, when Blackburn were up to play Newcastle, found them in a hotel bar a few rounds deep the night before the game and decided to, treat them to another round, on me boys, which of course they availed themselves of. No discipline, and just they were just a bit of a shambles, I think it's probably fair to say. They play Spartak Moscow at Ewood Park in the first game, and to be fair, they batter them. I think they took 20 shots in goal, but it just doesn't go in, and Spartak do what teams tended to do to Rangers and other British opposition, I guess, soak it up and spit them out. And Uran scored a bit of a Tim Flowers disaster, to be honest. And they won that game 1-0. There was a kind of famous bit of nonsense in Norway, where they got to Rosenborg, and that's a bit of a shambles as well, a bit of an embarrassment. They'd already had a bit of an embarrassment. Was it Trelleborg in the UEFA Cup the season before? Yeah, so they lost 2-1 in the 4 minutes to go. The Rosenborg winner scored by Stahl Stensas. There's a lot of future Old Firm players in this particular Champions League. Harold Brackback, another Rosenborg goal scorer in this particular group stage. So that's a bit of an embarrassment. They lose in Warsaw, so they get 3 defeats from 3. They draw at home with Legia. Alan Shearer has a sitter. He just missed an absolute. He hasn't scored. Chat at the moment. Is he really the man to lead England to the European Championships? He's not really firing. He's certainly not doing it in this new Champions League. And somehow they're still within a chance. They still got a chance of going through if they go to Moscow and win to play Spartak. And before there's a goal in the game, they are fighting with one another, and it's that tyrant Graham Lasso and England's Rose David Batty. Now, they never had a problem really before, been teammates for a while. David Batty inexplicably really moved over to left wing. They kind of get in each other's way. Lasso's quite a dynamic player. Batty wanted everything short, didn't really want to extend or expend much energy, and they started kind of fighting a wee bit at training, and it just wasn't quite working. They get in each other's way here, and they start arguing, and incredibly Lasso lands a left hook on David Batty, who doesn't really flinch. He kind of looks in stunned amazement that this has happened. Lasso said he just felt he had to get his retaliation in first, and the most Graham Lasso thing, he broke his hand punching David Batty, and David Batty had kind of hardly noticed. Colin Hendry and Tim Sherwood have a big fight as well, not quite coming to blows. Hendry gets sent off later on. Spartak win 3-0. This is a shambles. Blackburn do win their final game at home to Rosenborg. It's already done and dusty, but then they win 4-1. Mike Newell, 9-minute perfect hat-trick, right foot, left foot header. It'd be a record, I think, in the Champions League for 17 years. So, Davey, a shambles. They were kind of teetering a wee bit. Shearer kicked into gear because after that Rosenborg game, they would lose 5-0 at Coventry. But Shearer really did get into a groove. Huge amount of goals, propelled them to nearly getting back into Europe, actually, all with a groin problem. He would stop his season early, basically, to get that groin done. So he would be ready for Euro 96, where he was quite impressive from memory, but this was not impressive. And again, Davey, British football looks old, it looks tired, it looks like a pub team, literally a pub team fighting with each other on the pitch. The tactics are rudimentary. 4-4-2 looks so basic. It's pretty bad after United's humiliation the season before and ours.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that issue that we've said before. Firstly, as Manchester United and us have proved, that you have to learn how to play in Europe. But there was a lot of sort of overweening arrogance, whether or not it was perhaps just the kind of island mentality, whether or not it was the fact that maybe they'd have been better off, Martyn, in a group that had bigger names in it, because the reaction to the draw was basically, well, right, who are we getting in the round after from down south? And all the failings that we've talked about on shows about Rangers, on previous shows here about English sides, all of them come to the fore. One, they're not as athletic as these sides. Two, they don't know how to play when the physicality that's standard at home is clamped down on by European refs. And three, they don't do their homework on teams. They don't do their homework on sides. They don't know what the strengths of the opposition are. They just expect to beat them by turning up and doing their thing. You look at the players in that Blackburn side, and they should be beating these sides comfortably. Ray Harford, never a manager of a side even just a Premiership side, full stop. He'd had the spell at Luton. He was not up to it. There was a sense I felt that the whole Blackburn story had sort of reached its climax, and I never felt they were the same after that title win.
There was a sense inside the squad that it was over. In fact, I think that the chief exec had said, "You've won this title a year too soon." They climbed their mountain. They'd done it. It was this project, and the project was quite quick. It's hard to know of any quite as dramatic as that, David, because this isn't Abramovich taking over Chelsea or Sheikh Mansour and City. They weren't a top flight team, and they're champions quite quickly. It's really quite a quick turnaround. He starts or stops spending money. He starts to say, right, I've done what I came here to do. Let's just rein it in just at the time where other clubs are absolutely not, and they're starting to spend. And it's just, we're done. And you might be right, actually, about bigger names creating a bit of a buzz, a wee bit like Rangers in 21-22, that Europe just gave something a wee bit different, because that whole dressing room was like, well, we've done it. We're not going to be champions again. I mean, we're not Manchester United. This club doesn't do that. We're not Liverpool. We've climbed our mountain. That was simply the sense within the dressing room. So we're just getting
Yeah, and I think a few of them were starting to look at where am I going to be playing next season, because a couple of things that had happened. It's maybe hard to get across. Go and look at the amount of signings Blackburn make in the first 4 years of that decade. Yeah. They were signing everybody. I remember. Do you remember Paul Warhurst?
Any championship manager original memories?
Yes.
Defensive midfield, attack, left, right, centre. Could play everywhere.
Paul Warhurst was playing for Sheffield United, and he was a defender, and they had an injury crisis. They put him up front, and he scored something like 13 in 14 games, and Blackburn bought him for £2 million just because of that run. But that's what they were doing at a time when players were 2-3 million. Now, you're spot on when you say, then he reins it in just as good players are becoming 7, 8, 9 million, 10 million. Shearer goes for 15 million. And I think that it was almost like, that's fine now. We've achieved what we wanted to achieve, and now we'll settle for just being a Premier League side, which they were off and on for the next sort of 20 years or so, a very respectable side. Even now, they're a promotion chasing side in the Championship. But there was just this sense that if I was picking it up in Scotland, was emanating from them that, we're sort of done. But the players that they'd had who had carried them there, you're absolutely right, were, I think, taken aback because they had dropped their standards anyway, and then taken aback that the Champions League, far from being somewhere against these teams, these non-entity sides that they could just turn up and win, it was actually harder. They were finding it more difficult because it was unknown, it was alien. None of these guys have got much European experience, as you mentioned, the year before, in which they've lost. That's it. That's the sum total for a lot of these, because the signings weren't European signings at Blackburn back then. Wilcox and Shearer, Sutton, Batty, Lasso, all players who'd played in the Premier League but had no European experience, and they looked so far out of it. That last night is one of the funniest football matches I have ever watched in my life, and I had nothing against Blackburn, incidentally. I mean, how could you? They were there, and then they were spending money, but there wasn't any hatred of them. But this is a team that just completely collapsed. They're wandering about out in this field, and they've got a chance to go through. This isn't a dead rubber. This isn't, like, oh, I wish we weren't here. But they look like they wish we weren't here. And then Lasso, who at the time had a bit of an unfair reputation based on people thought he was a bit, well, just be honest, people thought he was gay because he read The Guardian.
He was smart.
That's how unenlightened it was at the time. But him and Batty fighting 2 England internationals, and then the complete collapse. But there was this sense of, I remember just a stunned sense from the English media. What they did, though, they took the wrong lesson out of it. Ferguson didn't. He understood it because he'd been through it. But the English media took the wrong lesson, which is, this is entirely Blackburn's fault. this is not anything endemic in our game that is stopping us. Whereas it was all the systemic things we talked about, lack of respect for opponents, not doing your homework on opponents who were all doing their homework on you, adapting to the way the game's refereed, high technical levels. They weren't taking those lessons. What they were just doing was, well, that was Blackburn's fault. It's no reflection on the English game. Of course it was a reflection on the English game.
They always felt a bit, to me, like a budget Man United of like a couple of years before. Like the type of players that they've got as well. It's like the poorer version of X, which was always a bit...
I would compare Adam to, just sorry to interrupt, but you're right. See, like Wilcox and Ripley, I always felt were like a sharpened Kanchelskis, but not good.
And then obviously you've got the two centre halves that you can compare. Then the midfield is a bit more combative and but not at the same level as your Keanes, etc. So it was always felt strange to me watching them. It sort of felt like a poorer version of what Man United.
Yeah, I think you're right, with the best striker in Britain.
Well, I want to talk about that though, because he doesn't. Does Alan Shearer get under-analysed? As in, you don't hear much. You hear a lot about Cantona was this, and you hear a lot about David Beckham did this, and various other players. You don't hear much these days about the type of player Alan Shearer was, or how he played the game. You just hear goals, Newcastle goals, black and white stripes, could head the ball, played for England. But in terms of like his game, I feel like there are players from that era who weren't as good, I don't think, or certainly weren't as memorable, but you hear more about the type of player that they are. I'm interested what your thoughts are on that. He just seems to be one of these people that is just sort of one of these players that's just left on their own a little bit, and he's just Alan Shearer, and we don't sort of dig into what type of player he was. Is that?
I think that is fair. I don't think I've read any kind of or much in the way of detailed analysis of Shearer. The Shearer and Sutton thing, which is the original kind of SAS before Shearer and Sheringham took that moniker over at England. And Shearer and Sheringham looked a far more, you can make more sense out of that, because Sheringham's a very intelligent player and he would come deep and make a lot of space and quite unselfish. Shearer and Sutton, I don't think, really got on particularly well. It was really who was getting into the box there. And Shearer actually changed things around with Ripley, and he changed his runs just so that he would basically just get there before Sutton. So it was a kind of a partnership that worked in spite of itself at times. I do wonder, I find it's a small sample size. I find his failure here fascinating in the way that I find McCoist's fascinating, even at a time when McCoist was the hottest thing around, 92-93, when it came to the group stage. Maybe the space and time not being quite what it might be at Fir Park or whatever else, because he kind of fluffs these lines. Now Shearer, obviously, as I said, probably carrying an injury, goes on to do great things and blah blah blah. I wonder, Adam, if it's because he could just do everything well enough that maybe he doesn't get that kind of analysis. Because what you're going to see soon, I guess, are strikers who have unbelievable pace, and that's the thing. They marry up with decent technique, but it's the pace that kind of marks them out. Shearer was the best header of the ball I've probably seen, and up there with Haitley, but he had an all-round game. He was powerful. He could be a predator, but he could score from 30 yards. He could just seem to do kind of everything. What he didn't have was that blistering pace, but he didn't really kind of need that in the English game at that time. And maybe because he wasn't pigeonholed, I don't know. He was just a bit of a machine. He just did so many things, and maybe he's a very, very good jack of all trades that maybe evades that analysis. I don't know.
He wasn't glamorous. He's called Alan. He had the wee hair island. Yeah, he was deliberately boring, deliberately to avoid. He didn't like doing interviews. So it's amazing, by the way, all these players for the 90s, like him and Scholes, who hated doing interviews. You can't shut them up now. They're fucking everywhere. But
concentrating on their game, that's why.
Yeah, well, I mean, fair play. But he was dull and he was remorseless. I actually think Harry Kane gets a bit of it now. Because he's so reliable and so good that people almost, Kane scored 20. How many times do you hear something like Kane say, it's Germany. And before that, Spurs, he takes everything for them, a free kicks. But I mean, it's nonsense. We tend to underrate. Shearer was good at absolutely every single part of being a striker, being a number 9. He scored goals at every level, bar this year. As I say, I think he was looking elsewhere in his career. But we're about to get into the era of Zola, Thierry Henry, these remarkable, Rolls Royce type forwards. And there's old Alan, who's a throwback to. Alan wants you to stick one on top of the goalkeeper in the first minute so he can go in and fuck him. That's the difference. And I think that, we do tend to underrate British players who are just utterly reliable in their game. Maybe because when an English player comes through who is a little bit more European, even to this day, and I'm going to give you an example of this, the likes of Hoddle, the likes of Letizia, that they didn't quite know what to do with them. And even now, Phil Foden in the England team, they don't quite know what to do with them. So I think that there's something more comforting about a Shearer type that fits a square peg for a square hole.
I guess as well, I know it's a well-worn thing, but moving to Newcastle, you kind of take yourself out of the top tiers of Europe, I guess, in terms of if he'd have went to Man United, as we all know, that's the famous question there. It's not necessarily that he would have been a better player, or it's probably not even that he would have scored more Premier League goals than he scored. I guess it's just that all-round exposure.
I think he would have been a better player, Adam. I think he genuinely would have had to have been. But he would have gambled on Newcastle being just at the door of that top tier in the summer of 1996. It wasn't absolutely fanciful. It should be said, just showing how much of a shambles Blackburn were by the end of that season. They offered him, and in order to try and keep him, they offered him the role of player manager at whatever age he was, and the summer of 96. And Ray Hartford's like, "Yo, that's absolutely fine. I'll take a step back." He did think about it, I think, for maybe more than he really should have. But
what age was he?
I'm probably still in his 20s. I don't think he was 30 by Euro 96. They were just desperate. They were just absolutely desperate. He had him and Douglas were the twin engines that kind of brought that title. But anyway,
Alan Shearer is 53 years old. So 27 years ago, he would have been 26 when they offered him that.
Yeah. That's just wild. Not a club functioning. I think probably still hungover. Adam, just before we leave that group and talk about one of your specialist subjects, Spartak again, can't take that away from them. They were quite impressive. A few players coming through: Onopko, Uran, and Eleniachev, who would obviously do well for Porto and whom we owe a bit of a debt. But your thoughts on them and how they kind of came through at that particular stage?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a few names there that popped out. Eleniachev, you mentioned, obviously wins the Champions League with Porto. Onopko and Nikiforov stand out to me from their time in Spain, I guess. Yeah. A couple of years later than this. Nikiforov, and again, maybe this dying art that we've been speaking about, but another centre-half hitting 5 goals in this competition, 5 goals plus. It's something that you don't see too much of anymore. I think it's an interesting point to talk about them, and it's an interesting time, as we said. Lots and lots of goals. You can say this was an easy group for Blackburn Rovers, and it does look like it in paper, but Spartak turned it into an easy group for them. They breezed us 6 wins out of 6. Nearly 3 goals a game overall. So it's interesting because I don't think of Russian teams as being like that at all. It's more stuffy, Iron Curtain, and even later on the teams that we've seen. What have we had since? I guess CSKA Moscow and Zenit won the UEFA Cup, didn't they? The 2000s.
Zenit unfortunately did win the UEFA Cup. Adam,
yeah. CSKA and Zenit won it in the 2000s. I think CSKA was a few years before Zenit. Those are the two that you kind of remember now. But Spartak just seemed to fire through this and score loads and loads of goals. They were, I think, again, a bit of a precursor to what we would see with Russia, kind of Euro 2008. I think with Siska and Zenit sort of formed that Euro 2008 there, but some of the players that you see here are sort of, you can sort of see the style of play that they're trying to get in. So I thought they were really interesting to watch, lots of fun. They were level with Nantes and half an hour to go in their tie. I think Nicky Florov had scored 2 goals to get through in that, and I think it's a really interesting season for them. They never come back into it. I know we've played Spartak Moscow 4 or 5 years ago, Rangers in the Europa League this time, but that's a team that appeared, scored lots of goals, had a goal scored in centre half, a couple of players that would go into some great things, but yeah, for whatever reason they just absolutely breezed the group stages here, probably, as we've said, because of the poor quality on show from Blackburn and probably Rosenborg in particular. But yeah, an interesting one, and another old sort of Iron Curtain type team that we're going to pick out.
So a fair bit of the weird and wonderful, bit of nonsense thrown in for good measure. But to wrap this week up, the European champions were doing European champions things, drawn in a group with Real Madrid, of course, as well as Ferencváros and Grasshopper. They just continued where they left off the season before. Adam, 16 points out of 18. Real Madrid home and away, no bother. Tricky quarter-final draw against Borussia Dortmund, a Borussia Dortmund team that we'll speak about in a lot more detail in a few weeks, I guess, because they of course are going to make their mark in the following season's Champions League. Home and away, no bother. In fact, the way that they attacked that quarter-final first leg in Dortmund is just incredible. There's no caginess. There's no, just see out a bit of a wave, and if we can pick off an away goal, then great. It's just front foot, balls out, just taking the game to them. We'll obviously come to the semi-final in a moment, but David's mentioned he thinks they're a better team. Not a huge amount of change. There's going to be a huge amount of change coming up, but there's not a huge amount of change here. Clarence Seedorf goes to Sampdoria. Rijkaard retires. You've got Davids, I guess, kind of coming through into maybe more prominence. Kluivert is around, although maybe things going on in his personal life that are making that, I guess, assumed development maybe a wee bit more staggered and a wee bit more difficult than first imagined. But is this just Ajax saying, yeah, we are with the boys, let's just take it up again?
Yeah, I think so. They doubled down, I think, on their philosophy. I'm not sure about better for me. I liked the 1-11 on the other on the season before that we've spoken about. You've got guys coming in here like Sonny Saloy, Kiki Musampa, Norden Wooter, who absolutely do a job and they do well, but they don't go on and have the same legacy as maybe some of the ones from the year before. So they're both very, very fun. What I like about the group stage there, as you mentioned, 5 draws, 1 win. 5 wins, 1 draw. Sorry, and the draw is away to the worst team in the group. Grasshoppers. It's very, those things just appear, don't they? And
it's very hard to go to Grasshoppers. Sometimes.
Yeah. Sure, but yeah, I think you're spot on. The most impressive one for me is the 2-0 in the Bernabeu. For the way that they play, it's been interesting. We'll come on to next week to look at Madrid, because I think in my head you just expect Madrid to just arrive and be Madrid, but they actually have this year where they're not quite the Real Madrid that I remember of the later 90s.
Early 90s Real Madrid were not what we think of now.
No.
That's sort of mid 80s to mid 90s. They're not. Then they go back and now they own the European Cup. Let's be honest. Teams lease it from them for a year here and there, but they weren't the powerhouse back then. And I think Martyn will sort of agree with me that if you grew up our age, our generation, we heard a lot about Real Madrid, but we didn't see it in the way that we saw from, say, Barca or AC Milan or Juve.
And we will talk about them next week, but the only thing I would just mention, I think David's made a good point there. I do remember this season being excited to see Real Madrid, because how the hell would I see them? Really, Spanish football, was it really on Sky? Might have just started. I can't remember.
No, 97 it starts on Sky.
Yeah. So you've got this team that obviously means a lot to I guess, guys, my dad's era and above, I suppose.
To Scottish people, it does.
Yeah, and now we're going to actually see them kind of close up because they're making their debut. But that is absolutely right. The semi-final then, Panathinaikos against Ajax. The first leg in Amsterdam. Late goal from your boy Adam up front for Panathinaikos, takes it very well. Van der Sar does all he can with these big massive spider legs to kind of put him off. He just manages to get ahead, clips it briskly into the top corner. An incredible, sensational result. This is a repeat, by the way, of a European final. I think Ajax's first European Cup final win was against Panathinaikos, but so they win in Amsterdam, and then in Greece, where you expect a lot of colour, a lot of noise, and fervent support, and a really difficult place to go. Again, Rangers know this. They are magnificent. David, you talked about your VHSs there. I wonder. I mean, we talked about Ajax against Bayern, didn't we? In the semi, or certainly one of the knockout rounds from 94-95, just being incredible in Amsterdam. I wonder where this rates, given the context of the game and the tie, to go over there and just dominate, just utterly dominate the ball. Litmanen's brilliant. They end up winning 3-0. But Davey, I know you wanted to mention that. Then I'll bring Adam in and just where that kind of ranks. Haven't he just maybe go to a different place mentally? I don't know.
Yeah, the first leg was the talk of the geek steamy. The very early message, like chat rooms as they were back then, the European football geek ones, I remember, were ablaze by this because it was so unexpected, because they had been so good in the group stage, then handily taking care of a more than respectable Dortmund side, and it kind of felt like it was just going to be a procession, and they've got Panathinaikos, who aren't very good, we think, by comparison. The first leg is a brilliant performance by Panathinaikos, because they are effectively a big smothering fire blanket, and they sit on all of their key players really, really well. They deny them space. They don't allow them to make short passes. They tactically foul. Now, this is not great to watch, but it still doesn't mean it's not a good performance. They are so clever. There's no rhythm whatsoever. Ajax get very annoyed, and stop doing all the things they do. They start actually hitting it long. Ajax start hitting it long, which gets a very agitated Louis van Gaal up and very red-faced on the side of the touchline. Second leg, what we're going to get, the Greeks are terrifically confident. And as you say, Martyn, it's, wow, the place is going to be bouncing. They might as well not have been there. Ajax destroyed them. Jari Litmanen was superb. He ran the show. And the reason for it is that they had adapted to what the Greeks were going to do. So the first leg, the Greeks had stopped them moving the ball quickly. The second leg, they just kept moving it, just even quicker than they normally would. And they created chance after chance. After 60 minutes, it's very clear the Panathinaikos players, who have a high energy style anyway, are gone. Their legs are away, and Ajax are just rampaging over them. It's one of the most complete European displays I have ever seen. And given the type of side that they were up against, who were so good tactically and so good at working out what to do in terms of stopping you playing, and all in inverted commas they had to do was stop you playing tonight. They've got the goal, they've got the away goal, They just need to keep it tight, hold for a set piece. They were unable to. They were blown away, and I just thought afterwards, this is football. This is exactly what you want. It's that 3-1-3-3 almost. It's every player working in unison, all of them terrific on the ball, all of them quick, all of them able to move the ball at a rapid rate. And they had this little jewel with his 80s mullet, Jari Litmanen, who's got a horrendous, even that was unfashionable then for those of you watching the highlights, right? Don't think you could cut up to Archaeos with that haircut and get in, because you wouldn't. But he was so great. And I just, as I say, I just went, well, there was a blip in the first leg. The procession to the second European Cup is now on. And I relay that. But please, if you are a real geek, and if you're listening, as you probably are, go and watch both these legs and see what I mean. The first leg performance from Pana is perfect. The second leg performance from Ajax is perfect and great football. And I just thought nobody can stop this side because they are literally good at everything. And now they've shown they can overcome a problem. If you set them a problem, they find ways to overcome it.
Adam, should we give a wee bit more love for the ability to dust themselves down, not panic, and again take all that noise and circus bullshit to one side and just dominate the game?
Yeah, there's a couple of interesting notes of context. I guess that it is one thing to turn up like they did the year before, fully formed, and maybe surprise teams to an extent, come with a game plan and have something work. Apologies, have something work for you. We spoke about Greece 2004. It's reasonable that something like that could happen. It's unexpected, but it's something that could happen. But what I like is coming back the year later as one of the best teams in the competition. Eredivisie winners again, unbeaten, like we said last time around. So pressure's on them big time to come. They've lost Rijkaard, who was a very important figure for them. They've lost Seedorf, like you said.
Who replaces Rijkaard then as a boss on the pitch? Did Frank de Boer step up to that kind of role? I know Danny Blint is nominally the captain, but who's the leader on the pitch?
It is. You've got Sonny Saloy coming in, and then Frank de Boer coming forwards and doing that sort of interchange piece, if you like. You've then got more responsibility given to Davids in the middle, and then also you've got Ronald de Boer, I think, at points playing centrally. Even in the final, he played off the left a little bit at points in there. So there's a little bit of rejigging, if you like, a little bit of manoeuvring, which you need to do. The year before, they pretty much had every player available, and it's something that certainly wasn't the case this year. Obviously, we'll come on to the final. They had a few players missing. Mark Overmars, for example, misses it through injury. So there's a whole lot of different round of expectation, other things to manage, as well as that, like David mentioned, that home leg, Panathinaikos go and do their job, basically. And they're not going to come away and think we're favourites to go here by any stretch, but they're thinking we get out of Amsterdam with what we needed, essentially more than what we needed probably, and let's just see what we can do in the next leg. And for Ajax just to turn up and blow them away, I think speaks volumes for where they were. So yeah, I think they were just as impressive at points in this run as they were the year before, and to go back to back for a team that was still very, very young and was in the process of being picked apart, I think is mega impressive here.
Okay, so Ajax are in their second final in succession. We'll speak next week about that final, but obviously who will join them there. A couple of European football royalty are in that other side of the draw, as well as yet another French champion to discuss. All that and more next week, but thank you, David.
A pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
Until next week, bye for now.
podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
At your job, do you ever have to deal with a nose roller? How about a snub pulley? Well, if you're installing a new conveyor belt system, dealing with the different components can sound like you're speaking a foreign language. Luckily, you've got a team ready to help. Grainger's technical product specialists are fluent in maintenance, repair, and operations. So whenever you want to talk shop, just reach out. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.